it's wonderful to meet you. Thank you for taking a minute out today. I appreciate it. So, before we get into the new album, I want to know this first and foremost. 6 years ago, this pandemic changed so much about the way that we operate, the world, all of us, especially musicians and creatives. How did you get through that era, and how has it changed the way that you approach things today?
Wow. What a crazy time. So I had been on the road. I was on the road when things were closing down. I was performing with the St. Paul Chamber Orchestra, which is this amazing ensemble, conductorless. And I was scheduled to fly out to California to record an episode of a PBS music show called Now Hear This right after that. And when you have TV stuff lined up, like that's very hard to reschedule. And so we were trying to figure out, the orchestra concerts were stopping, were closing down, and I had to get to California because this shoot was gonna go no matter what, and we didn't know anything. So I managed to make my way out there mostly by driving home from Minneapolis and then taking a really scary, at that time, very scary flight out to California because we didn't know anything, right? And we did this episode and it was great. And it was a great episode because I was able to use both classical and jazz things that I do. I wrote a reharm for a Mozart piano concerto that we used, and just wonderful thing, except for it was terrifying. So when I came home, I was fried. And it was all still very scary. I had to teach online. I was teaching at the University of Denver at the time, and we didn't know what was going to happen with our day jobs. I was playing in the Colorado Symphony at the time, and so there was a lot of unknowns. What I ended up doing, aside from teaching online, which ended up having some great upsides, which was unusual, but I ended up doing a lot of podcasts with different musicians in the bass world, especially. I didn't write a lot of music at the time. I was fortunate, right? Because at some point, the fact that I had a steady job with the Colorado Symphony meant that I was getting paid for big chunks of that time. I was very much more fortunate than a lot of musicians, especially jazz musicians who are working gig to gig. So for me, it was a time to reflect on how busy I was and whether or not I really wanted to continue on the way I was. And one of the effects of that was actually recording this album, because I recorded this primarily at the tail end of the pandemic. And I think that free time really spurred me to say, this is the perfect time as things are opening up again, but we're still not all full-time back working, to do this. And so I called Don Clement, my collaborator, and we started working together. And she called Dru Heller, the drummer on my album, and they were just so excited to play. We were all so excited to play, even though it was still a little bit scary. So I feel like I can hear that a lot in the album. No one had been working. And so to finally get into the studio and be able to record was pretty magical, I have to say. Yeah.
As a non-musician, but somebody that does interviews a lot, I amped up my interviews to a very epic proportion. I'd never interviewed that much. And I'm wondering, with you doing that, was that a huge social conduit for you, for your mental health, to stay connected to the community? How did that materialize for you?
Absolutely. I mean, Jason Heath, who runs a great podcast for the bass world, both classical, jazz, all kinds of bassists. He was a good connector at that time. He connected a lot of us through his podcast. But I also had to spend a lot of time supporting students, and that was helpful. The students were really, really struggling. The college students, especially the newly entered freshmen and the people who are getting ready to graduate. And so we did a lot of work. I worked a lot with our computer music expert at University of Denver, who set up these incredible systems where the lag time was as short as it possibly could be, so that we could all work together and create together. It was, in a weird way, it was so epically creative because we had to find workarounds. And so we were always looking for the next best way to communicate an idea through teaching or through performing music together, which I did some of those when we finally did figure out these very complicated systems so you could perform with someone in Amsterdam, for instance. And so there was value in all of that, even though it was incredibly hard and painful, and a lot of us weren't getting paid. I still came away from that experience so grateful for what we did have, especially playing in person. The one of the institutions I worked for at the time was instrumental at creating the types of things that singers and horn players could use, so that the spread of the particulates was contained. And that was huge. We did a lot of discussion about that, about how to get trombone players to be able to play safely, and trumpet players and sax players and all those folks, and singers, you
Yeah.
know. So I was involved in a lot of that stuff as well.
So there's so many things going on with this release. It's a debut, it's a homecoming, it's a declaration. There's all of these different aspects of it. So with that in mind, going into the creative sketch work of this, what were you ultimately hoping the final product would be like?
Well, I think it goes back to when I was studying music at Indiana University, and I had a good friend who was in the composition department, also a bass player. And at that time, as a young person, I really felt, wow, if I were just a little bit smarter, I could be a composer. I know I can be a performer. I know I can do that. And I just carried that with me for so long. And I had a period in my life around 2015 where I made a deal with myself. I said, well, I can quit my adjunct job teaching bass, but I have to go study with Art Landy in Boulder and 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 work on my composition and work on my composition life. And so from that time, from around 2015 to when I released, or when I recorded the album, I should say, that was the journey for me. That was recovering a lost part of myself that I hadn't explored in a long time. And so that's actually what I wanted to examine as I recorded that album. I'm really, I mean, the album's called Evanstonia, which is a nod to my hometown of Evanston, Illinois, just outside of Chicago. And so much of my thoughts about being a composer started there. I had a great friend, Charlie Harrison, who's now the head of the jazz orchestra at UCLA. And we would just get together and compose little riffs. And one of the heads on this album is from that time, from when I was a teenager. So I just thought this is the time to, after working with Art and Boulder, who's just such an amazing force of nature, this is the time to put all this stuff down. And he was always bugging me to do it. He's like, there aren't as many female bass players, there aren't as many female jazz composers. You need to document and write more music. Just keep writing. And so that was really the inspiration for me. I had all these ideas. I just didn't often have the courage. And that's what that time period gave me, that sort of that working with Art, and then the pandemic, which you had nothing else to do but to think about whether you were courageous enough to keep creating, which was really important.
Yeah, for sure. So what are you ultimately hoping the listener gets from this album?
Well, I hope they get that there are these so many different influences in my musical life. I grew up outside of Chicago, obviously, huge jazz scene, huge folk music scene. That's always been a big part of my life. Huge classical scene. Just surrounded by music. My parents had the WFMT radio station on all the time. And I want people to have a sense that you don't have to stick to one path in your writing or your listening. Um, Art Landy talks a lot about, like, when people ask him what kind of music he writes, he says personal music. I write personal music. And I think that's just a great descriptor for what I do. It's all deeply personal. I had no real sense of trying to please anybody. I'm unknown in this world, in your world, and so I didn't have any of that baggage upon me. It was just all fresh stuff that I thought, well, if people like it, great. And this is just a new way that I want to express myself. And I felt it was important to do it. So I hope it gives people courage as listeners, and as if they're thinking about performing, composing, instead of just performing.
And I think the other part of releasing music in these modern times, clearly this country is going through a lot of stress, a lot of turmoil, and we've seen in generations past that the arts and culture have been a way of kind of making us feel connected, making us feel as though we're holding on to something real. Do you think about that a lot now when you either do live or you're putting this album out, that you're giving people some level of feeling connected and feeling like music is a healer?
Absolutely. Music is the alchemy of all of our personal feelings, our interior world, plus what we're observing on the outside. And so as musicians, we have a job, we have a calling to invoke that in people, to make sure that they relate to their interior world in such a way that it impacts the exterior world in a positive way. I've always felt that.
Yeah.
And when I was really young, I thought music could save the world. I still feel that way, but I have less grandiose ideas of on what scale it can happen. But I know it's happening. I have no doubt whatsoever. I grew up with such great masterworks of classical music, Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, the Ode to Joy, so many amazing pieces, as well as great masterpieces of jazz and great jazz musicians. And I know what impact they have on me. So I'm just assuming that it's all about authenticity, right? If I'm authentic in what I'm trying to communicate, I know it will touch somebody. When I'm not authentic, when I'm just going through motions for things, then it doesn't work. And I think this album for me is incredibly authentic. There's not a single note on there from me or from my colleagues playing on there that isn't just exactly how they felt at the moment. And so I'm really appreciative of that.
So you could have picked any instrument, but you picked the bass.
Yeah.
And you could have picked any career, but it's been music. Why that combination? How did that become your destiny?
Well, I tell some of my students, especially the ones who I know this is true for them, I said, for me, there was no plan B. There was never a plan B. I started playing piano when I was 4 years old, and I played piano all through college. And I got to a point, though, when I was in my later sort of, elementary years, early middle school, where I just realized I wanted to play with other people. And piano can be a very solitary instrument,
Yeah.
especially classical piano. And so my mom actually had the great idea of playing bass. I knew I wanted to go low. My sisters had gone high with violin, and boy, I couldn't stand that squeaky, squacky, violin sounds when I was a kid. So that was a real draw for me, was playing with other people. I just fell in love with playing with other people. And the bass, the great thing about the bass world is that we're so communal in general. We're in the ring of the orchestra, we're in the back of the band. We go into so many different areas of music so easily. I'm grateful for that, and I'm sad that there are certain instruments that don't feel like they can do that, although that's getting better. But so for me, bass was just a perfect fit in that way. And I played in the jazz band in high school, and I played electric in high school, and but at some point, I had to buckle down and really practice classical so that I could get a full-time job in an orchestra and support myself.
Yeah.
And so I did that for a long time. Yeah.
So talk to me about the first live performance, jazz or otherwise, that you saw that totally blew you away and left an indelible mark on the way that you would approach the stage.
Wow. There's so many. Chicago was such a great music town when I was a kid, and my parents did take us to a lot of things. I mean, I went to jazz performances a little bit later in my youth because I was mainly going to like the Chicago Symphony and things like that. But Fareed Haque was playing a lot in Chicago at the time when I was a young person, the guitarist. And my friend Charlie and I used to go and listen to him play, and he's such a soulful player, such an amazing guitarist. And of course, Kurt Elling was in Chicago at the time. And I wasn't particularly young, and I was a huge fan already. But one of the things that really impressed me the most in my early years of listening to jazz was going to hear him at the Green Mill
Yeah.
and hearing his voice. I actually had my bachelorette party at the Green Mill. No Vegas for me. It was Kurt Elling at the Green Mill. And his pianist at the time, Lawrence Hobgood, was one of my dorm mates at the Aspen Music Festival. Actually, probably a lot of those Aspen Music Festival jazz performances too were really instrumental. They had an amazing big band program there that I used to go to. So I can't say that I went to any of the great, artists who came through town in Chicago jazz at the time, except for Fareed and Kurt, but boy, they sure left a huge impression on me.
Speaking of interviews, when you mentioned Lawrence's name, I remember there's so many interviews that happened, but I instantly got a warm feeling. He was such a nice
Yeah.
human. Um, I need to revisit that. So let me ask you this: what is it that you like the best about being a professional musician? What gets you up every day? What motivates you to evolve and to love and embrace what you do?
Well, back to your point of how these are stressful times. When I walk into I now teach at the University of Colorado Boulder. When I walk into that building after maybe listening to the radio on my drive from Denver to Boulder, I walk into that building and the first thing I hear is music. I'm like, thank God this is what I do for a living. I grew up in a very politically connected household. I had a lawyer and a judge for a parent and a teacher, and always politics, always talking about the social issues of the day. And I care deeply about that. And I always want to have my music be informed by that at some level. But my mission is to do that through music. I remember I was reading an interview with Brian Blade, and he said words to the effect of God gave me this gift. It's my responsibility to do something with it. And I really believe that.
Yeah.
I think it's a responsibility. It's not even just a calling. It is a responsibility. It's not about me. I'm at a point in my career where a lot of this isn't about me anymore. It's about what is this supposed to contribute to the world in any kind of hopeful way, in any kind of small way, whether it's through teaching, composing, or playing in ensembles. That's the mission. So I love the freedom of it being less about me every year that I play, every year that I get older. That's such a freeing thing.
So you obviously love classical music, but and for the purposes of our having this jazz show, I want to know this. Why do you love this art form we call jazz?
Oh my gosh, I've always loved it. I've always loved it. Like I said, we grew up listening to everything. WBEZ in Chicago. Um, my family, my parents were just music lovers. They loved anything that communicated. And even though they primarily listened to classical and folk, they also listened to jazz too. Um, but I feel like this is an era now where we don't have to choose. So many people are crossing over in so many ways.
Yep.
And I don't want to choose anymore. And I know it's surprising for some people, but one of the things I think they liked about me when they hired me was that I have this background. I've played in tango band for years. Um, I've been writing music. I have another band called Grand Orchestra Navarre, which is this kind of whacked little salon type orchestra. We play all kinds of stuff, originals, classical, jazz, and everything. And if you get good enough at your instrument, if you're lucky enough to have good teaching and get good enough at your craft, you get to do this stuff. And I feel very fortunate that I've had great teachers and great mentors. I lived in New Orleans for 3 years playing with that orchestra, which is where I met my husband. And living in New Orleans, man, that is just wow. And he went to school. His schoolmates were Brian Blade and Stanton Moore and John Coward. Those were guys he went to school with and who
Wow.
was still around at the time. And Jeff Albert was my roommate, another great trombone player from New Orleans. And so when we weren't playing our shows, we'd go to Snug Harbor after our concerts. We'd walk into the Marigny and go to Snug Harbor or the Funky Butt, which doesn't exist anymore. I remember seeing Josh Redman. That's a concert I'll never forget. Josh Redman and Diane Reeves's pianist Peter at the Funky Butt. And it was just, I think that also lit a fire under me to really explore things. It took a while to get back to that,
Yeah.
but having that grounding there was also huge.
So let me ask you this. Everyone has a perception of you, family, friends, everybody on the bandstand, everyone that knows you, but you run the show. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
I'm still finding out. I don't know how else even to answer that. And I hope to still find out. Um, my core perception is that I've worked really hard at the technique of my craft. of playing the instrument and playing the bass and playing the piano. And the harder I work at that, the easier it is for me to express the things I want to express, the things that I come to in my life. Um, I just love that process so much of finding out something new about myself. That's one of the things I love about teaching too. And I mean, I get much more out of teaching, I think, than my students ever do.
Yeah.
Um, because I learn a new way to do something, and maybe they're not even ready to apply it yet, but I've figured it out for myself. And then the next time I teach the skill, it's better. So I think there's a lot of that. I have a perception of myself as a teacher, but primarily as a teacher of myself. I grew up in a household where the prime directive was keep learning. No matter what you do, keep learning. And so I think I'm an exceptional learner. I don't always succeed at what I'm trying to learn, but I will always go after the learning.
So you've mentioned some seminal jazz towns. You've talked about some wonderful performances, but if you could get into a time machine and go back in time and see one jazz show, where are you going?
Oh, that's tough. My
It's
son
hard.
has gotten to be a huge jazz fan, and he is such a Chet Baker fan right now. I would take him, and
Yeah,
we'd go back and go to a Chet Baker show,
that would be great.
and that would be huge.
Yeah,
Bill Evans would be another. I would go and listen to him and Eddie Gomez, who I think is coming to Denver soon. Um, those two, I think, would be huge for me.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So beyond streaming, if anybody wants to pick up a copy of the album, catch you live, any of the good business, where's the best place to go?
Well, the album's going to be released on May 29th, and after that, it'll be available on Bandcamp and on all the streaming services and at susancahill.com. There'll be links there for to be able to hear it. My colleagues Don Clement and Dru Heller are super busy, but we'll be setting up a release series of concerts as soon as she's done. She's on tour until the end of May. And then I get very busy. I tour all summer with different festivals and different places I go in the summer for my more classical life. But we will definitely get our stuff together to have concerts around Denver and hopefully other places as well. But in the
Okay.
meantime, you can find the album on all the special places that everyone finds everything.
Yeah, absolutely. I will put links in the show notes. So this has been great. Thank you so much. Thank you for taking a minute out. Best of luck on the release. It's been wonderful.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you having me.
Yeah.
Neon Jazz.